The afternoon tea still has a taste I remember well. Earl Grey tea, with a little honey mixed in, served alongside freshly baked blueberry scones. Lucy sat across from me, her diamond-studded glasses glinting under the light. Her nails were done in a fresh champagne pink, and she sat cross-legged on my floral print fabric sofa, looking like a porcelain doll fresh out of its box. She glanced down at the old enamel brooch pinned to my knitted Sierra digan, and the corner of her mouth curved upway road. In a voice just loud enough for our neighbor Emertha, who was arranging flowers nearby, she said, "Mom, honestly, that brooch of yours, it's a bit, well, how should I put it? Your taste is outdated." She said outdated, but I read a different word in her eyes. She said cheap. She touched the shiny platinum butterfly pin on her own chest and told me that this was what young people appreciated nowadays. Simple, modern, valuable. I did not say anything in reply. I just took a sip from my teacup. That brooch was left to me by my mother. It was made of sky blue enamel with a small golden daisy in the center. The gold plating along the edges of the petals had worn somewhat d'arc over time. On the back, there was a tiny engraved Yar, 1912. I knew Lucy had always had her opinions about me, her widowed mother-in-law living in an old neighborhood. She thought my sweaters were not fitted enough. She thought my roses grew too wild in the Garden. She thought even more that my meager monthly pension would never be enough to save up for her future child's private school tuition. I set my cup down and ran my fingertip gently over each petal of that daisy. When my husband passed away, he handed me this brooch and said only one thing. "If one day you really cannot hold on, scrape off the enamel on the back." At the time I thought he was joking. A man who spent his whole life selling redeeming equipment, what great secret could he possibly leave behind? But today, with Lucy and her stylish friends sitting right there, I felt a certain string inside my heart being plucked ever so softly. "Lucy," I said, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible, "this brooch belonged to my mother. She was a seamstress in her day." Before I even finished speaking, Lucy let out a soft little, "Oh," drawing the sound out long, and then she turned to her friend Erin and gave her a quick wink. Erin covered her mouth and giggled. "Handmade, how that is sweet. Sentimental value and all." But their faces Clea, RLY, said something else. "A old seamstress's flea market find, and she pins it on her chest like a treasure." That night, I could not sleep. I was alone in this old house in Queens, with the locust leaves outside scratching against the window in the wind. I kept thinking about my mother's hands. Those hands were covered in tiny needle pricks, but were always warm. She would sit under the lamp night after night, sewing wedding gowns and evening dresses for other people, but she never made herself a single nice garment. Before she passed, she hid this brooch under my pillow and left a yellowed note with one line of elegant cursive handwriting. "If you ever find yourself with nowhere left to turn, scrape it open." I turned on my bedside lamp and pulled out the tiny screwdriver I used for fixing my reading glasses from the bottom drawer of my nightstand. My fingers were trembling. Not from fear, but from a strange sort of thrill. It felt like opening a letter that had been sealed for decades. I turned the brooch over and held it up to the light. I looked closely at the blue enamel on the back, and sure enough, there was one small patch where the color sat just slightly higher than the rest. I took the tip of the screwdriver and very gently, very slowly, began to scrape. The enamel powder fell in little flakes onto the velvet cloth beneath. Underneath, there was a tiny recess, and inside that recess lay a ring of very fine silver foil. The foil surrounded a set of numbers. A telephone number. The area code was 212, the Old Manhattan Exchange. And at the end, there were two letters. E and S. I read at that string of numbers for a full 10 minutes. My mother's maiden name was Evans. My middle name is also Evans. A telephone number with no array code explanation, no name attached, only a pair of suffix letters. It was like a seed that had been buried for more than half a century. I hesitated for a long time, then copied the number onto my palm and restored the brooch to its original state. I lay in bed counting sheep until the sky turned light. The next morning, after Lucy and her friends had left for their spa day at the shopping center, I walked over to the landline phone at the end of the hallway. The numbers on the dial pad were a little faded. I pressed each one with the tip of my finger. Every beep thumped against my chest like a little knock on my heart. The phone rang 4 times. Then an elderly but extremely clear, our male voice picked up. Evan's residence. Who is calling, please? My throat went dry. I could rely squeeze out the words. My name is Dorothy, Evans BA, RNA Road. My mother was Grace Evans. She left me a brooch, and I scraped it. There was silence on the other end for a good 5 seconds. Then I heard a deep, heavy breath. And then the man suddenly spoke in a tone that sounded almost like he was standing at attention. Miss, please hold the line. I will transfer you to the Holbu-Drishing office immediately. I held the receiver and looked out the window at old Tom next door trimming his hedge. He thought I was just an ordinary old woman soaking up the morning sun. But on the other end of the line, I heard one transfer after another. From the estate management division to the trust oversight department, and then to a department I had never heard of before. The North American Regional Standing Advisory Liaison Office. Finally, a woman's voice came on. It was Wa RM, but CA Ride a metallic precision. Mrs. BA RNA Road, according to the original terms and the ongoing verification protocol, you activated the 5th-level inquiry Chenshan of the 1912 Evans Family ART and Real Estate Perpetual Trust at exactly 9:17 this morning. Would you like to initiate a full asset review, or would you prefer to receive only the annual distribution summary? My head was spinning. I thought of my mother, always hunched over that sewing machine. I thought of my father's old beat-up pickup truck. I thought of my husband, who used to joke that I'm alright a poor flower GA redenner, and that was my lot in life. I gave my thigh a hard pinch. It hurt. That meant I was awake. I read my throat and tried to sound like a woman who was not dreaming. I want a review, I said. The whole thing. Very well, Mrs. B.A. RNA Road. Under the family agreement, as the only direct female descendant of Grace Evans, you automatically hold the lifetime oversight authority and income beneficiary rights to the 1912 trust. The trust currently includes 3 historic buildings in Lower Manhattan, a coastal property in Florida, and a group of securities portfolios spread across Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. The average annual distribution value over the past 5 years comes to approximately $3.4 million. However, please be aware that these assets are not automatically unsealed. You are required to attend an in-person identity verification and signing of intent. The location is 40 Wall Street, top floor. What day would be convenient for you? I looked at my own fingers. The gold band on my ring finger had faded to a pale yellow. I looked at the old refrigerator in the corner, the one I had owned for almost 15 years. On top of it sat the cheap ceramic suga our Lucy had given me as a housewarming gift. She said it matched my kitchen perfectly. I took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. When I hung up, I realized my palms were soaked with sweat. The mantel clock in the living room struck 10. Sunlight fell diagonally across the faded rose pattern on the rug. I pinned the brooch back onto the collar of my CA Redigan and looked at myself in the mirror. I mimicked Lucy's usual tone and said to my own reflection under my breath, "Taste is outdated, huh?" That evening Lucy came back with my son Matthew for dinner. Matthew worked as a claims adjuster at an insurance company. He was always worn out by the end of the day. He walked in with his tie crooked. Lucy set down her new lambskin handbag and casually asked me what I had done that day. I said I watered the flowers, baked a batch of CEO keese, and called an old friend. She pursed her lips. "Mom, you really should keep less contact with those old lady friends of yours. That Mrs. Dora you were talking to last time, her financial advisor NEA, RLY got us roped into a pyramid scheme." I did not argue with her. I'd just serve her an extra piece of roasted chicken breast. Matthew ate with his head down. He never noticed, all through dinner, that the enamel on my brooch seemed to have caught a little more light in the afternoon than it used to. The next day at noon, I took the subway into Manhattan. The CAR was packed with young men in suits and Latino women pulling shopping carts. Nobody paid any attention to this old white-haired woman in her faded cardigan and her old brooch. The lobby of 40 Wall Street was quieter than I expected. The black security guard at the front desk looked at me for a second and asked who I was looking for. I said I was here for the top floor. A woman by the name of Evans was expecting me. He flipped through his appointment book, then looked up Shaw RPLY. His entire expression changed. He personally escorted me to the express elevator and swiped his access card for me. As the elevator rose, my stomach rose right along with it. I thought of my mother again, that seamstress who never spoke of her past. When she made my very first school uniform, she used a piece of dark red Scottish plaid. She said it was her favorite pattern when she was young. Only now did I understand. She did not lack a story. She had simply chosen to bury it in her stitching. The top-floor office door was made of walnut. Heavy, and raying a faint scent of beeswax. The woman from the phone call yesterday was standing by the window. She was about 50 years old, blonde, and wearing a Shaw RPLY tailored navy blue suit. She reached out her hand the moment she saw me. Mrs. Barnay Road, I am Jane Morrison, the executor of the Evans Family Trust. Your mother chose to freeze all assets 70 years ago, leaving behind only one brooch as the token. She set only one condition. Unless the designated descendant actively activated the trust and read in person for verification, the trust would remain in permanent silence. She paused and slid a thick stack of documents across the table. Tawa, me. And now you are that descendant. Welcome home. I flipped through the densely packed pages. Each page listed countless zeros and property locations. As my fingers traced the edge of the file folder, I let out a small laugh. I thought of Lucy sitting on my sofa yesterday with that condescending look. I thought of how she mocked this little brooch. That little object she called outdated was resting quietly in my cardigan pocket at that very moment. It weighed 100 times more than everything Lucy held so dear. On the subway ride home, I told nobody. The corner deli was still selling $2 hot dogs. The bodega cat was still licking its paws at the doorstep. Everything looked the same, but I knew something had shifted. I clutched the tempora rewrites confirmation letter in my pocket. One thought kept running through my head. Next week's family dinner, it was my turn to set the tea table. I stayed quiet the entire first week. I did not say a single word. I only switched out the old sofa covers for a new set. Dark green velvet. Lucy came over and complimented them. She said, "Mom, you are finally getting a clue." I smiled and dropped an extra suga, our cube, into her teacup. The second week, I quietly listed that Florida coastal property for a short-term rental. The rent money went directly into my new account. When the bank manager called to confirm the transaction, his voice was so polite you would have thought he was talking to the president. I told him to keep mailing the paper statements to my old address and to put no markings on the envelope. The third week, Lucy showed up at my door out of the blue. Her face was pale. She said Matthew's company was laying people off. He was likely on the list. And they had just signed a pre-construction contract for a new apartment. They were still short a big chunk of the down payment. For the first time, she came without makeup. There were dark circles under her eyes. She sat at my kitchen table, twisting a paper napkin between her fingers. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking a little, "could you possibly loan us $20,000 RS? Just $20,000. I promise I will pay you back within 3 months." I slowly poured her a cup of chamomile tea from my old teapot. "Lucy," I said, taking my time, "didn't you tell me last time that my brooch was outdated?" She froze for a second, then root waving her hands and saying she had spoken out of turn. She had not been thinking. I did not rush to answer. I reached into the drawer and pulled out that sky blue enamel brooch. Right in front of her, I gently scraped off the thin film on the back and exposed the telephone number underneath. "Do you know who I called that day?" I pointed the number out to her. "I called this number my mother left me. And after I made that call, I understood something. Some things look old, but their foundation is brand new. And some things look new, but their foundation cannot survive one gust of wind. Lucy Sta read at that number. She looked up at me. Her lips moved, but no words came out. I stood up and took the cheap ceramic suga jar she had given me off the top of the refrigerator. I dumped the remaining half jar of suga into the trash can and set the jar back in its place. I am keeping this jar, I told her, because it reminds me not to judge by appearances. As for the money, do not rush. Wait until Matthew's situation becomes clear. You go back and tell him to come for dinner Sunday night. I have something to tell both of you. She walked out with her feet rely touching the ground. I stood at the door and watched her taillights turn around the corner. The setting sun was falling on the nearly faded rose bushes in the garden. I gently touched the daisy petal on my brooch and said a silent thank you to my mother. On Sunday night, I plan to show them something. Not the trust documents. An old, yellowed photograph. In it, a young woman stood in front of a tall building. That very building I had visited today. Lucy's words at that tea table still lingered in my mind. But I was not going to use money to slap her down. That would be too easy. I wanted her to understand one truth. You never know what an old lady keeps hidden inside her brooch. Just like you never know how many unopened secrets are reburied in an ordinary life. I pulled open the drawer and tucked that rights confirmation letter underneath my mother's old photograph. Then I turned off the lamp. Sunday could not come soon enough. Sunday morning came with a gray sky and the kind of damp chill that settles into an old woman's bones. I woke up before the alarm, lay still for a while, and listened to the radiator clanking in the corner. My hands were steady now. That trembling from the day I scraped the brooch felt like something that had happened to a different person, a younger person, someone who still had the luxury of being afraid. I got up, made myself a cup of black coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my mother's photograph spread out in front of me. The building behind her was unmistakable. 40 Wall Street. The same stone facade, the same towering lines. She must have been in her early 20s in that picture. Her hair was pinned up in that old-fashioned way, and she wore a simple white blouse with a collar that stood up neatly around her neck. No brooch in sight. She had not rented it yet. Or maybe she had already hidden it away by then. I studied her face for a long time. She looked serious, almost stern, but there was a softness around her eyes that I remembered from my childhood. She was the kind of woman who measured twice and cut once, who never raised her voice but somehow always made herself heroed. I wondered what had driven her to freeze that entire fortune and walk away. What had she seen, or who had she lost, that made her choose a life of mending other people's clothes over a life of luxury? That question had been scratching at the back of my mind ever since I left Jane Morrison's office. I had not asked her because I was still too stunned by the numbers on those pages. But now, sitting in the quiet of my own kitchen, the question felt urgent. It felt like the key to something I was not quite ready to name. I finished my coffee and went to the pantry to take stock of what I had for Sunday dinner. I had bought a nice roasting chicken the day before, some new potatoes, a bag of green beans. Simple food. The kind of food I had always served. I did not want to change anything about the way I did things, not yet. Lucy and Matthew would come expecting the same old Dorothy, the same worn sofa, the same faded rug, the same home-cooked meal with no frills. And I would give them exactly that. The only difference was that this time, I would be watching. I would be paying attention to every flicker of Lucy's eyes, every twitch of Matthew's jaw. I had spent years letting their comments slide off me like water off a raincoat. But raincoats have seams, and water always finds its way through eventually. By noon the sky had clear red, and the sun came out, thin and pale like watered-down honey. I put the chicken in the oven and root peeling the potatoes. My phone rang around 1 o'clock. It was Jane Morrison. She had a crisp, efficient voice that made you feel like you were being handled by a professional who had seen every kind of surprise and was not easily impressed by any of them. Mrs. Barney Road, I wanted to let you know that the formal asset transfer will require one more step. The trust agreement includes a clause that requires the presence of a witness who can attest to your identity and your mental capacity at the time of activation. This is a Standa RD protective measure from the original 1912 drafting. Would you prefer to bring your own witness, or would you like us to provide one? I thought about it for a second. The only witnesses I had in my life were my neighbors and my son. Neither seemed like a good option. You provide one, I said. But I don't want anyone showing up at my door. I'll come to you when I'm ready. She agreed and said she would have the paperwork prepared. She also mentioned that the trust committee had scheduled a preliminary meeting for the following month. It was a routine gathering where major beneficiae rise were introduced to the advisory Boa Road. I told her I would think about it and hung up. The chicken was browning nicely. I basted it with butter and thyme, the way my mother used to do, and the smell filled the whole house. It was the smell of Sundays from my childhood. My father would be in the RD tinkering with his tools. My mother would be at the stove, and I would be sitting at the table with my homework spread out, pretending to study while actually reading the funny pages from the newspaper. Those were simple times. I had not known then that my mother was anything other than a hard-working seamstress. I had not known that she saw right a fortune in her pocket and chose to ignore it. I wondered if she had ever been tempted. I wondered if she had ever lain awake at night, as I had, and thought about what it would be like to open that door. Matthew and Lucy arrived at exactly 6 o'clock. He was ryeing a bottle of red wine, the cheap kind from the drugstore, and she had a store-bought apple pie in a Boa Road box. She was wearing a silk blouse in a shade of coral that I had to admit looked lovely on her, and her hair was freshly blown out. She stepped through the door with her usual brisk energy and gave me a peck on the cheek. "Mom, you look well," she said. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of surprise, as if she had expected me to look worse. I took the pie from her hands and thanked her. Matthew gave me a hug that was a little tighter than usual. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sits deep in the bones and does not go away with a single night of sleep. We sat down to dinner. I reviewed the chicken and passed the platter around. Lucy talked about the new appartement, about the marbly countertops and the walk-in closet she had already designed in her head. She talked about the school district and the NEARBY playground and the young couples who were moving into the neighborhood. She did not mention the down payment shortfall. She did not mention the layoff at Matthew's company. She was performing the way she always did, painting a picture of a life that was polished and secure and just a few steps away from perfect. Matthew picked at his food and nodded along. I watched him, my only son, my boy who used to come home from school with grass stains on his knees and holes in his socks. He had grown into a man who ride the weight of his wife's expectations on his shoulders, and it was bending him in ways he probably did not even recognize. After dinner, I read the plates and brought out the coffee. Lucy offered to help, but I waved her back to her seat. I wanted her to wait. I wanted her to sit there with her hands folded on the table, wondering what I was going to say. I poured 3 cups and set them down. Then I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out the brooch. I placed it in the center of the table, between the sugar bowl and the creamer. "Matthew," I said, "do you remember when your father gave me this?" He looked up a little riled by the question. "I remember him handing you something, I guess. I was pretty young. I didn't really know what it was." "It was this brooch," I said. "And before that, it belonged to my mother. Your grandmother, Grace. She sewed clothes for other people her whole life. But the brooch was not just a brooch. It was a key. I found out this week what it unlocks." Lucy set down her coffee cup with a little clink. "What do you mean, unlocks?" She was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in her voice. She was worried I was about to ask for a handout. She was worried I had finally become a problem she could not manage with a few polite words and a store-bought pie. "I mean," I said, looking directly at her, "that I made a phone call. The number was hidden on the back of this brooch, and that phone call led me to a trust fund. A very old trust fund. My mother set it up back in 1912 and never touched it. She left it as a kind of insurance policy, in case her descendants ever hit rock bottom and needed a way out." Matthew leaned Four-Way Road. His fork was still in his hand. "A trust fund, how much money are we talking about?" I did not answer right away. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I watched Lucy's fingers tighten around her napkin. I watched Matthew's eyes go wide and then narrow, like he was trying to calculate whether this was real or some kind of joke. I picked up the brooch and held it out to him. Enough, I said. Enough to make a lot of things possible. Enough to help with that down payment, if that is what you need. But I want to be clear about something first. Lucy straightened up in her chair. She was bracing herself. She had her mare on now, the bright smile and the quick words that she used to deflect anything uncomfortable. Of course, Mom. Whatever you need to say. We are listening. I am not going to hand this money over like a cash machine, I said. I worked hard my whole life. I raised Matthew. I kept this house. I lived on what I rented and never asked anyone for a dime. That trust fund is not my money. It is my mother's legacy. And if I am going to use any part of it, I am going to use it in a way that honors her. That means I am going to take my time. I am going to learn about where it came from and what it was meant for. And I am going to make my own decisions about who gets what. Lucy blinked. I could see her recalibrating, trying to figure out how to handle this new version of me. The old Dorothy would have been hesitant, apologetic, eager to please. The old Dorothy would have felt guilty for having something that her daughter-in-law did not. But the old Dorothy had not scraped that brooch. The old Dorothy had not stood on the top floor of 40 Wall Street and held a piece of paper that said her net worth was measured in millions. That woman was gone. She had walked out of that office building and left a part of herself behind. Mom, Matthew said slowly, you saying you are rich, I laughed. It came out louder than I expected. I am saying I have options. That is a new feeling for me. I want to see how it sits before I start handing out checks. I want to understand what kind of woman my mother really was. And I want you both to understand that this does not change who I am. It just changes what I am able to do. Lucy gave a tight little smile. That sounds reasonable, Mom. We are not asking for anything. We just want you to be happy. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her fingers were cool and dry. She was still performing. But I noticed that she did not let go of that napkin. She was still squeezing it, white-knuckled, under the table. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk. Matthew asked about the garden. I told him the roses were done for the season, but the hydrangeas were still holding on. Lucy complimented the coffee and said she would have to get the same brand for their new kitchen. They left around 9, with the leftover chicken wrapped in foil and the apple pie untouched. I watched them walk to their car, Matthew with his shoulders hunched and Lucy with her heels clicking RPLY on the pavement. The taillights disappeared red around the corner, and I stood in the doorway for a long moment, breathing in the cool night air. I went back inside and picked up the brooch from the table. I held it up to the light and turned it over. The scrape marque was still visible, a tiny silver scratch against the blue enamel. I ran my thumb over it and felt the smoothness of the metal underneath. Somewhere in that small piece of jewelry was the story of my mother's life. The woman who gave up everything for reasons I did not yet understand. The woman who trusted that one day, when the time was right, her daughter would find the courage to scrape away the surface and see what lay beneath. I put the brooch back in my pocket and walked into the living room. The house was quiet. The radiator clinked once and then fell silent. I sat down in my room chair and looked at the photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of me and my husband on our wedding day. We were young and silly and had no idea what we were getting into. He used to say that I had a stubborn streak a mile wide. He said it with affection, like it was one of the things he loved about me. I always thought he was talking about my insistence on doing things my own way, on not letting anyone push me around. But now I wondered if he had known more than he let on. I wondered if he had been holding on to a secret of his own, waiting for me to find my way to it. The phone rang at 11:30. I almost did not pick it up, but something made me answer. It was Jane Morrison again. Mrs. Barnay Road. I apologize for calling so late. I just received a document from the archives that I think you should see. It is a letter written by your mother in 1963. It was sealed and marked for your attention in the event of activation. Would you like me to read it to you? Or would you prefer to come in and see it in person? My throat tightened. A letter from my mother. A piece of her voice from all those years ago, still waiting for me. Read it, I said. Read it to me now. Jane Clea read her throat. I heard the rustle of paper on her end. Then she began to read, in a voice that was softer than I had heard it before. My dearest Dorothy, if you are re-hearing these words, then you have done the thing that I could never bring myself to do. You have looked beneath the surface and found the courage to claim what is yours. I hope you will forgive me for keeping this from you. I was not trying to hide it. I was trying to protect it, and I was trying to protect you from the same weight that I ride my whole life. There are people in this world who will see your wealth and want to take it from you. There are people who will smile at you and call you family while they reach for your pockets. I read that lesson the hard way, and I wanted to spare you the same pain. But if you are rereading this, you have already proven that you are stronger than I was. You have proven that you can handle whatever comes next. Use it wisely, my love. Use it to build something that matters. And never let anyone make you feel small for what you are. You come from a long line of women who knew their own worth, even when the world refused to see it. With all my heart, your mother, Grace. I sat there in the dark living room with the phone pressed to my ear. Tears were running down my cheeks, but I was smiling. My mother had not been weak. She had been smart. She had seen the wolves coming, and she had built a wall. And now that wall had finally opened a door, and I was standing on the threshold. Thank you, Jane, I said. I will come in tomorrow to see the original. She said she would be waiting. I hung up and sat in the armchair for a long time. The moon was high and thin, the relay lighting the edges of the curtains. I thought about Lucy. I thought about how she had looked at me across the dinner table, trying to figure out how to play this new game. I thought about Matthew, caught between his wife's ambitions and his mother's secrets. And I thought about my mother, sitting in this same kind of darkness half a century ago, making a choice that would echo all the way to this night. I still did not know everything, but I knew enough to move four-way road. I knew that the next time Lucy sat at my table, she would see something different in my eyes. Not anger, not revenge, just a quiet certainty that I had been riding a fortune on my collar all along, and she had been too busy looking at the surface to notice. I went to bed with the brooch on my nightstand, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Tomorrow, I would read my mother's letter with my own eyes. Tomorrow, I would start asking the hard questions. But tonight, I let myself feel the weight of her words. Never let anyone make you feel small. I had spent years feeling small. I was done. Sleep came easier than it had in weeks. And when I dreamed of my mother, young again, standing in front of that tall building with the sun on her face and a smile that told me everything was going to be all right. I woke up the next morning with my mother's voice still echoing in my head. Never let anyone make you feel small. I repeated those words to myself as I brushed my teeth and made my bed. They felt different now. Before, they had been just a phrase, something you said to yourself when you needed a little boost. But now they ride the weight of a woman who had walked away from millions and never looked back. I wanted to understand that choice. I needed to understand it. So I got dressed in my usual clothes, the same old cardigan, the same sensible shoes, and I took the train back to Manhattan. Jane Morrison was waiting for me in her office, with a manila envelope on her desk. It was thick and yellowed at the edges, tied with a faded red ribbon that had probably been there since the day my mother sealed it. Jane handed it to me without a word and stepped back to give me space. I untied the ribbon slowly, the way you open a gift that you have been waiting for your whole life. Inside were several sheets of stationery, cream-colored and brittle, covered in my mother's familia, our handwriting. She had always written with a fountain pen, the kind that left little puddles of ink at the bottom of each letter. Her loops were tall and sweeping, her T's crossed with a sharp diagonal stroke. I read the letter again, this time in my own hands. The words were the same as the ones Jane had read over the phone, but seeing them in my mother's own script made them feel more real. There was more at the bottom of the page, a postscript that Jane had not mentioned. P.S. The name you are looking for is Francis Whitmore. He was my brother. Your uncle. I have not spoken to him in 40 years, and I do not expect you to either. But if you ever need to know the full truth, he is the one who holds the final piece. Use this information as you see fit. I trust your judgment. I read that postscript 3 times. My mother had a brother. I had an uncle. I had spent my entire life thinking my mother was an only child, that her family had been small and unremarkable. And yet here was proof that there had been someone else. Someone named Frances Whitmore. Someone who had been cut out of her life for 4 decades. I looked up at Jane. Did you know about this? I asked. Did you know my mother had a brother? Jane nodded slowly. The trust documents mention a Francis Whitmore as a contingent beneficiary. He was originally listed as a second-degree heir, but he was removed from the active roll in 1958. The records do not specify why. I assumed it was a family dispute. Those are common in estates of this size. But I did not know the extent of it until I found this letter. I folded the stationery and tucked it back into the envelope. 40 years was a long time to hold a grudge. Whatever had happened between my mother and this Francis Whitmore must have been serious. And now I had a name and a choice. I could leave it alone, let the past stay buried where it belonged. Or I could dig deeper and find out what had broken a brother and sister apart. I thanked Jane and left the office. The morning sun was bright and sharp, the kind of light that makes everything look clean and new. I walked for a while without thinking about where I was going. My feet ride me past the old department stores and the crowded sidewalks, past the street vendors selling hot pretzels and the tourists taking pictures of the tall buildings. I ended up at a small park near the river, the kind of place where old men play chess on stone tables and mothers push strollers along the winding paths. I found an empty bench and sat down. The name Francis Whitmore kept circling in my head. I did not know where to start looking for him. He could be dead. He could be living in another country. He could be right here in New York, just a few blocks away, going about his life with no idea that his niece had just stumbled into his existence. I pulled out my phone and called Jane back. She answered on the first ring. Jane, I need to ask you something. Can you find out where Francis Whitmore is? Does the trust have any contact information for him? There was a pause on her end. I can check the historical records, she said ruefully. But Mrs. Barna Road, I need to caution you. If he was removed from the trust, there is a reason. Your mother made a deliberate choice. Are you sure you want to reopen that door? I looked at the river. A barge was making its way slowly upstream, riding a load of something I could not identify. I thought about my mother's hands, those hands that had sewn so many garments for other people. I thought about the way she used to avoid questions about her family, changing the subject with a gentle firmness that I had always accepted without question. She had kept this secret for a reason, but I was not sure that reason was mine to accept without examination. Jane, I said, I need to know. Not for the money. For her. I need to understand who she was. And I think this Francis Whitmore is part of that story. Jane sighed. It was a professional sigh, the kind that meant she was about to do something she did not entirely agree with. I will make some inquiries. Give me a few days. And Mrs. Barna Road, please be careful. People with old money sometimes have old wounds, and not all of them heal well. I told her I would be careful and hung up. The barge had passed out of sight by then. I sat on the bench for a while longer, watching the pigeons peck at crumbs on the pavement. A young woman sat down at the other end of the bench with a baby in a stroller. The baby was asleep, its tiny mouth open and its fists curled up near its cheeks. I smiled at the woman and she smiled back. Simple things. Ordinary things. The kind of moments that reminded me why I was doing this. I was not chasing money. I was chasing the memory of a woman who had given up everything to protect me from something I still did not understand. That evening I got home and found a message on my answering machine. It was Lucy. She sounded different, more cautious than usual. Mom, I hope you are redoing well. Matthew and I talked about what you told us at dinner, and we want you to know that we support you. Whatever you decide to do with the trust, we are behind you. Call me when you get a chance. I would love to have lunch with you this week. I listened to the message twice. She said, "We support you," like it was a favor she was granting me. Like I was a child who needed her approval. I felt a flicker of the old annoyance, the familiar prickle of irritation that always came when Lucy tried to manage me. But I pushed it down. I was not the same woman who had sat through that afternoon tea and let her mock my brooch. I had changed. The change was still new, still settling into my bones. But it was there. I called her back the next morning. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom, I am so glad you called. How about Thursday at that little bistro NEA? Are your place the one with the outdoor seating? I know you love their quiche." I agreed. We set a time for noon. I spent the rest of the morning in my jardin, pulling out the dead rose canes and turning over the soil. Gardening had always been my way of thinking. The repetitive motion of the trowel, the smell of the artach, the satisfaction of making things neat and orderly. It gave my mind space to wander. And it wandered Tawa RD my mother. Tawa rode Francis Whitmore. Tawa rode the question of what had happened all those years ago. On Wednesday afternoon, Jane called me back. "I found him," she said. "Francis Whitmore is alive. He is 93 years old and living in a retirement community in New Jersey. I have an address and a phone number. Would you like me to send them to you?" I wrote down the information on a scrap of paper. The address was in a town called Maplewood. The phone number had a familiar RA code. I read at the digits and felt something flutter in my chest. I could call him. I could pick up the phone and dial those numbers and hear the voice of a man I had never met. A man who was my mother's brother. A man she had not spoken to in 40 years. But I did not call him that night. I was not ready. I needed more information. I needed to understand the context before I opened that door. So, I did what any sensible woman with a newfound fortune would do. I hired a researcher. Jane recommended someone, a retired archivist named Eleanor Pierre Sons who specialized in family histories and old estate records. I called Eleanor the next morning and asked her to dig into the Whitmore side of the family. I told her I wanted to know everything. Who Francis Whitmore was. Why he had been removed from the trust. What had happened between him and my mother. Eleanor sounded eager. She was the kind of person who got excited about dusty documents and forgotten correspondence. She said she would start with the public records and work her way through the family archives. She estimated that it would take about a week to get a full picture. I told her to take her time and to bill me directly. Thursday came faster than I expected. I walked to the bistro at 11:45 and found Lucy already seated at a table under a striped umbrella. She was wearing a pale yellow sundress and oversized sunglasses. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine advertisement. She waved when she saw me and gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Mom, you look wonderful. I love that cardigan. The color really suits you." It was the same cardigan I had worn to her house a dozen times, the same faded beige that she had never commented on before. But I smiled and thanked her and sat down. The waiter brought us menus. Lucy ordered a salad with grilled chicken and a glass of sparkling water. I ordered the quiche and a cup of tea that we made small talk for a while. She talked about the new APA meant again, about how they had negotiated a better price and were hoping to close by the end of the month. She did not mention the layoff. She did not mention the down payment. She was circling around something, the way you circle around a puddle you do not want to step in. Finally, she set down her fork and looked at me directly. "Mom, I am going to be honest with you. Matthew is really stressed about his job situation. He has been applying to other places, but the market is tough right now. And with the APA and everything else, we are feeling the pressure. I know you said you want to take your time with the trust. I respect that. I really do. But I was hoping that maybe you could help us out with a small advance. Just to get us through the next few months. We would pay you back. I promise." She used the word promise like it was a heavy coin. I remembered the way she had promised to call me every week when she and Matthew first got married. She had not kept that promise. I remembered the way she had promised to come help me paint the kitchen 2 summers ago. She had canceled at the last minute. Promises from Lucy were like leaves in autumn. They looked pretty until the wind blew them away, but I did not say any of that. I just took a sip of my tea and set the cup down gently. Lucy, I said, I told you I would help. And I will. But I need to understand the full situation first. I need to look at your budget, your savings, your expenses. I need to see where the money is going. Not because I don't trust you, because I want to help in a way that actually makes a difference. She blinked. I could see her calculating, trying to decide whether to push back or to accept. She was not used to me asking questions. She was used to me nodding and agreeing and handing over whatever she needed without any fuss. This new version of me was confusing to her. I could see it in the way she tapped her fingernails on the tabletop, the way she looked down at her salad and pushed a piece of lettuce around her plate. Of course, Mom, she said finally. That is completely reasonable. I will have Matthew put together a document for you. A full financial picture. I want you to feel comfortable with whatever you decide. I nodded and picked up my fork. We ate the rest of our lunch in a strange sort of peace. The kind of peace that comes after a storm when the air is still and everything feels a little uncertain. When we finished, Lucy paid the bill. She insisted. She said it was her treat. I let her. It was a small gesture, but it was something. A recognition that maybe she was not the only one who could be generous. I walked home slowly, taking the long way through the residential streets. The leaves were rooting to turn, gold and red and orange, the kind of colors that made you stop and notice the passing of time. I thought about Frances Whitmore. I thought about my mother. I thought about the trust and the fortune and all the questions that were still unanswered. But I also thought about Lucy. Despite everything, she was trying. She was clumsy and transactional, and she had no idea how to relate to me as anything other than a resource. But she was trying. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine from Eleanor P.A. Sons. She said she had found something interesting in the county archives and wanted to share it with me. I called her back and she answered immediately. Mrs. B.A. RNA Road, I found a marriage certificate. Your mother Grace Evans married a man named Thomas Whitmore in 1940. That was before she married your father. It looks like she was married for just under 2 years. And Thomas Whitmore was Frances Whitmore's older brother. I sat down heavily on the kitchen chair. My mother had been married before. She had a brother-in-law who was also her first husband's brother. And she had never mentioned any of it. Not once. I felt the ground shift under me, like I had been walking on solid arch and suddenly discovered it was all a layer of thin ice. Eleanor, I said slowly, keep digging. I need to know what happened to Thomas Whitmore. And I need to know why my mother left him. Eleanor said she would get back to me in a few days. I hung up and sat in the silent kitchen. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window and fell across the table. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brooch. I held it up to the light and looked at the tiny daisy in the center. My mother's flower. A flower that had bloomed in the middle of a story I was only beginning to uncover. And somewhere in New Jersey, an old man named Francis Whitmore was going about his day, with no idea that his niece was about to knock on his door. The days that followed were strange ones. I went about my usual routine, watering the plants, sweeping the front porch, making my morning coffee, but everything felt different. The air in my house seemed heavier, jaw-ridged with all the questions I had not yet answered. I kept the brooch on my nightstand where I could see it when I woke up. It was a reminder that nothing in my life was as simple as it had once seemed. Eleanor P.A. Sons called me on Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was crisp with excitement, the kind of voice that told you she had found something good. Mrs. B.A. RNA Road, I have more information for you. Thomas Whitmore, your mother's first husband, died in 1942. It was a car accident, according to the death certificate. He was 34 years old. And here is the interesting part. The accident happened just a few months after your mother filed for divorce. The records are resealed, but I found a reference to a court proceeding. It looks like there was some kind of dispute over the estate. Thomas Whitmore came from a wealthy family. The Whitmores had money. Old shipping money. And when he died, your mother was cut out of the inheritance completely. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Cut out how they were married. She would have been his next of kin. Eleanor paused. Unless there was a prenuptial agreement or a will that specifically excluded her. I am still looking into that party, but I did find something else. Francis Whitmore, Thomas's brother, was the executor of the estate. He was the one who handled the distribution of assets after Thomas died. And from what I can tell, he made sure your mother received nothing. Not a single dollar. I sat down at the kitchen table and STA read at the wall. My mother had been married to a wealthy man. She had been widowed young. And instead of inheriting a fortune, she had been left with nothing. That explained so much. It explained why she had become a seamstress. It explained why she had worked so hard her whole life. It explained why she had set up that trust and hidden it away, determined never to let anyone take anything from her again. And it explained why she had never spoken Francis Whitmore's name. Eleanor, I said, do you think Francis Whitmore was responsible for cutting her out? I cannot say for certain, she said ruefully. But the timing is suspicious. The divorce filing, the accident, the estate distribution, it all happened within a very short window. And your mother was left with nothing. Whatever happened between them, it was not amicable. I thanked Eleanor and hung up. My hands were shaking. I thought about my mother, young and newly widowed, fighting for what was rightfully hers. I thought about her being pushed aside, erased from the family records, left to fend for herself with nothing but her sewing machine and her pride. And I thought about Francis Whitmore, the brother who had taken everything and given nothing back. That evening I made a decision. I was going to visit him. I was going to go to that retirement community in New Jersey and look him in the eye and ask him what he had done to my mother. I was not going to be angry. I was not going to scream or accuse. I was going to listen. I wanted to hear his side of the story. Because somewhere in the middle of all this mess was the truth, and I was tired of living in the dark. I called Jane Morrison the next morning and told her my plan. She was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Barna Road, I understand why you want to do this. But please remember that Francis Whitmore is 93 years old. He may not be the same man he was 50 years ago. He may not even remember the details clearly. You need to be prepared for that. I know, I said. I am not going in with a list of accusations. I just want to hear what he has to say. And if he is not willing to talk, at least I will have tried. Jane wished me luck and gave me the name of a local lawyer who could accompany me if I needed legal support. I said I would keep that in mind, but I wanted to go alone. Some conversations were meant to be private. On Friday morning, I drove to New Jersey. The retirement community was a neat cluster of low buildings surrounded by manicured lawns and winding walkways. There were flower beds everywhere, bright with late-season blooms. I parked my car in the visitor lot and walked to the main entrance. A young woman at the front desk asked me who I was visiting. I gave her Francis Whitmore's name. She checked her computer and told me he was in the common room, playing chess. She offered to escort me there. I followed her down a long corridor lined with paintings of sailboats and pastoral scenes. The common room was a large, sunny space with comfortable chairs and a fireplace that was not lit. A group of elderly residents were scattered around the room, reading newspapers, watching television, or simply sitting with their eyes closed. In the corner, at a small table, two men were hunched over a chessboard. One of them was thin and frail, with white hair that stood up in soft tufts. He was wearing a plaid shirt and a pair of suspenders. I knew immediately it was him. He had my mother's eyes, the same pale blue, the same thoughtful expression. I walked over to the table and waited until he finished his move. He looked up at me with a curious tilt of his head. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was thin but clear, the kind of voice that had probably been firm and commanding in younger days. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, "my name is Dorothy Barna Road. I am Grace Evans's daughter. Your niece." He read at me. For a moment, I thought he had not heard me. Then his face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks like water from a cup. He set down the chess piece he was holding and leaned back in his chair. The other man at the table looked at him with concern. "Frank, are you all right?" Francis Whitmore waved him off. "I am fine, Henry. I just need a moment." He looked at me again, his eyes sea-urching my face. You look like her. You have the same mouth. The same way of holding your chin. I sat down in the chair across from him. The chessboard was between us, a battlefield of black and white pieces frozen in mid-battle. I found your name in a letter my mother wrote, I said. She mentioned that you were her brother, and that she had not spoken to you in 40 years. I came here to ask you why. He let out a long breath and ran a hand through his thinning hair. Grace, he said softly, I have not heard that name spoken out loud in a very long time. You know, she was my favorite sister. My only sister, really. We were close when we were young. She used to follow me around the house, asking 1,000 questions. I taught her how to ride a bike. I taught her how to fish. She was fearless, that one. Nothing SCA read her. Then what happened, I asked. Why did you cut her out of the estate? Why did she leave with nothing? He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were wet. It was not my choice, he said. I know you will not believe me, but it was never my choice. Thomas, my brother, he was the one who made all the decisions. He was older, bigger, louder. He ran the family businesses. My father put him in charge of everything, and Thomas loved power. He loved control. When he married Grace, I thought he actually loved her. But after the wedding, something changed. He became possessive, jealous. He did not like her having friends outside the family. He did not like her spending money. He did not like anything that took her attention away from him. I listened with my hands folded in my lap. My mother had never told me any of this. She had never said a word about her first marriage or the man who had made her life miserable. Thomas made her sign a prenuptial agreement, Francis continued. He told her it was standard road, that all the Whitmore wives did it. She did not have a lawyer. She did not know any better. She trusted him. And when she tried to leave him, he used that agreement against her. He threatened to take everything she had. He told her he would ruin her reputation, make sure no one would ever hire her as a seamstress again. He wanted to break her. And he almost did. What about the accident? I asked. How did Thomas die? Francis looked away. A muscle in his jaw tightened. It was a car accident. He was driving too fast on a rainy night. The road was slick. He lost control and hit a tree. I was the one who identified his body. It was a terrible thing, but I cannot pretend I was not relieved. He was not a good man. He made everyone around him miserable. But when he died, the family estate fell to me, and I had to make a choice. What choice? I asked. The choice to honor his wishes or to help your mother. He met my eyes again. I was young. I was red. My father was still alive, and he hated Grace. He blamed her for Thomas's unhappiness. He told me that if I gave her anything, he would disinherit me, cut me off completely. I would have been left with nothing. So I did what I was told. I followed the will. I made sure she got nothing. And I have regretted it every single day of my life. I sat there in silence. The chess game lay untouched between us. The other man had wandered off, leaving us alone in the corner of the common room. I looked at Francis Whitmore, this frail old man with his shaking hands and his guilty eyes, and I felt something shift inside me. I had come here expecting to find a villain. I had come here expecting to find someone who had stolen from my mother out of greed and malice. But instead I found a man who had made a RDLY choice decades ago and had been paying for it ever since. Did you ever try to make it right? I asked him. Did you ever reach out to her? He shook his head slowly. I tried. Several times. I wrote letters. I made phone calls. She never responded. She would not speak to me. She would not accept any of my attempts at reconciliation. I think she blamed me as much as she blamed Thomas. And maybe she was right. I was complicit. I let my fear control me. I let my father control me. And I lost my sister because of it. I thought about my mother, the woman who had raised me with such quiet strength. I thought about the way she had always seemed so self-sufficient, so unbothered by the opinions of others. She had built a life out of nothing. She had created a home, a family, a legacy. And she had done it all with the weight of this secret pressing down on her. Mr. Whitmore, I said, I do not know if I can forgive you. That is not my place. My mother is gone, but I can tell you this. She was not broken by what happened. She went on to have a good life. She married a kind man. She had a daughter. She was happy in her own way. She did not let Thomas win. Francis let out a sob. It was a quiet sound, really audible, but I heard it. He pressed his hand to his face and let his shoulders shake. I did not reach out to comfort him. I sat still and let him feel what he needed to feel. A lifetime of guilt does not disappear in a single conversation. But maybe it can start to loosen. Maybe it can start to crack open. After a few minutes, he composed himself and looked at me again. Thank you, he said. Thank you for coming. Thank you for telling me that. I have ride this for so long. I never thought I would get a chance to explain myself to anyone in her family. I never thought I would get to hear that she was all right. I nodded and stood up. I am glad I came. I still have a lot to process. But I am glad I heard your side of the story. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. If there is anything I can do to make this right, please let me know. I do not have much left. But whatever I have, it is yours. It should have been hers. It always should have been hers. I squeezed his hand and let go. I will think about it. Take care of yourself, Uncle Francis. He smiled at the word, Uncle. I saw the way it softened his face. You too, Dorothy. You too. I walked out of the common room and through the long corridor. The autumn sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn. I got into my car and sat there for a while, ring at the building where my uncle lived. I had come with anger and left with something closer to understanding. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. On the drive home, I called Eleanor and told her what I had read. She listened quietly and then said, So the trust. Do you think he knew about it? The question stopped me cold. I had not thought of that. Francis Whitmore had been the executor of the Whitmore estate. He had handled Thomas's finances. He might have known about Grace's trust, the one she had set up in 1912. He might have known all along and never said a word. I do not know, I told Eleanor. But I am going to find out. I hung up and drove the rest of the way home in silence. The sun was setting by the time I pulled into my driveway. The house looked warm and welcoming, the way it always did. I walked inside and went straight to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table with my mother's brooch in my hand. The pieces were rooting to come together. But there were still gaps, still shadows, still secrets waiting to be uncovered, and somewhere out there, Lucy was getting ready for another dinner at my house. She did not know about Francis Whitmore. She did not know about Thomas. She did not know about any of the tangled history that had led me to this moment. But she was about to find out, because I was done keeping secrets. I was done letting the past hide in the dark. The next time we sat down together, I was going to tell her everything. And we would see how she handled it. The week after my visit to Francis Whitmore was a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Jane Morrison sent me a stack of documents that needed my signature. Eleanor Pierre's son sent me a detailed report on the Whitmore family history, complete with old newspaper clippings and photographs of people I had never met. I spent my evenings at the kitchen table, reading through it all, trying to piece together the full picture of my mother's life. It was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. I had the outline, but the details were still fuzzy. Lucy called me on Wednesday. She sounded bright and chipper, the way she always did when she wanted something. Mom, I was thinking, why don't we have a family dinner this Sunday, just the four of us? You, me, Matthew, and maybe you could invite that nice neighbor of yours, Amertha. I would love to get to know her better. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to create a cozy family atmosphere, the kind of setting where it would be harder for me to say no to her requests. She wanted to soften me up before asking for the money again. But I had read a few things over the past few weeks. I had read that I was not the same woman who used to let Lucy walk all over me. And I had read that sometimes the best way to handle a situation like this was to lean into it. Sunday sounds lovely, I said. I will make a roast. And Lucy, I have something I want to share with all of you. Something important. So please make sure you and Matthew are on time. There was a pause on her end. I could almost hear her calculating, trying to figure out what I meant. Of course, Mom. We will be there. Should we bring anything? Just yourselves, I said. And maybe an open mind. I hung up and let out a long breath. Sunday was going to be a big day. I had not decided exactly how much I was going to tell them. I knew I would tell them about the trust. I was not sure if I would tell them about Francis Whitmore, about my mother's first mariage, about all the tangled history that I had only recently uncovered. That party felt too raw, too personal. But I knew I had to tell them something. I had to start the conversation. Saturday morning, I went to the grocery store and bought everything I needed for the roast. A nice piece of beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, fresh herbs. I also bought a bottle of good red wine, the kind I would never have bought for myself on my old pension. I was not trying to impress anyone. I was just trying to show myself that I could do things differently now that I spent Saturday afternoon in the kitchen, preparing as much as I could in advance. I peeled the potatoes and chopped the carrots. I made a simple gravy base. I set the table with my best dishes, the ones that had been in my mother's Sedebo RD for as long as I could remember. They were old and slightly chipped, but they were beautiful in their own way. The floral pattern was faded, but the colors were still soft and lovely. On Sunday morning I woke up early and put the roast in the oven. The smell filled the house, rich and savory, the kind of smell that makes you feel like everything is going to be all right. I set the table and arranged the flowers from my garden in a small vase. I wanted everything to feel warm and welcoming. Not because I wanted to make Lucy comfortable, because I wanted to create a space where the truth could land softly. Matthew and Lucy arrived at exactly 5 o'clock. Lucy was wearing a black dress with a PRL necklace. She had Clea RLY dressed up. Matthew was in a button-down shirt and slacks. He looked nervous, the way he always did when Lucy had been talking to him about something serious. I welcomed them in and offered them a glass of wine. Lucy accepted with a bright smile. Matthew hesitated, then took one too. Emerida arrived a few minutes later with a basket of homemade rolls. She was a sweet woman in her 70s, widowed like me, with a gentle laugh and a way of making everyone feel at ease. I had invited her on purpose. I wanted another woman at the table, someone who would balance out the dynamic. Someone who would remind me that I had other people in my life besides Lucy and Matthew, that we sat down to dinner. The roast was perfect, tender and juicy. The potatoes were golden and crisp. We ate and talked about ordinary things. Emerida told us about her grandson's soccer game. Matthew talked about a case he had been working on at the insurance company. Lucy talked about the new apartment again, the marble countertops, the walk-in closet, the proximity to the good schools. She was laying the groundwork, painting a picture of the life she wanted. And I was watching her, waiting for the right moment. After dinner, Clea read the plates and brought out the coffee. I set the cups down and took my seat at the head of the table. Lucy was still talking, filling the silence with chatter about paint colors and furniture deliveries. I waited until she paused to take a sip of her coffee. Then I said, "Lucy, Matthew, I want to tell you something." They both looked at me. Lucy set her cup down slowly. Matthew leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Emerida looked at me with quiet curiosity. "I've been doing some research," I said, "about my mother, about my family, and I have found out a lot of things I never knew before. Some of them are painful, some of them are surprising, but all of them have helped me understand who I am and what I want to do with the rest of my life." I paused and looked at Lucy. Her face was fully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was bracing herself for bad news. She was bracing herself for me to say that I was not going to give her any money. "First of all," I said, "I want you to know that I am going to help you with the down payment. I have already spoken to Jane Morrison and she is working on the paperwork. You will have the money by the end of the month." Lucy's face lit up. She let out a little gasp and put her hand over her mouth. "Mom, that is amazing. Thank you so much." I do not know what to say. "Let me finish," I said gently. "I am giving you this money because I love Matthew, and because I believe that families should help each other.
But I want to be clear about something.
This is not going to be a regular our thing. I am not going to be a cash machine. I am not going to bail you out every time you overspend or make a bad decision. This is a one-time gift, and I need you to understand that. Lucy nodded quickly. Of course, Mom. I understand completely. We are so grateful. You have no idea how much this means to us. I looked at Matthew. He was staring at his coffee cup, his jaw tight. I knew he was feeling uncomfortable. He had never liked asking me for money. He had always been the one to insist that they could handle things on their own. But Lucy was persuasive, and Matthew was not good at saying no to her. There is something else, I said. I want you to know about my mother, about Grace. She was not just a seamstress. She came from a wealthy family. She was married before she married my father. She was married to a man named Thomas Whitmore. And when he died, she was left with nothing. His family cut her out of the inheritance. They left her with nothing. Lucy's eyes widened. Wait, your mother was rich, but you grew up in that little house. You never had any money.
We did not, I said.
Because my mother did not have any money. She was forced to start over from scratch. She worked as a seamstress for the rest of her life. She never complained. She never told me any of this. I only found out after I scraped the brooch and made that phone call. I pulled the brooch out of my pocket and set it on the table. The little daisy glowed in the soft light. This brooch was the key. It unlocked a trust fund that my mother set up years ago. A trust fund that she never touched. She left it for me. And I am using some of it to help you and Matthew. But I am also using it to honor her. To find out the truth about what happened to her. And to make sure that the same thing does not happen to anyone else in this family. Emerda reached over and touched my hand. Her eyes were kind and understanding. Dorothy, that is a beautiful story. Your mother must have been a remarkable woman. She was, I said. And I am still running about her. I visited her brother last week. Francis Whitmore. He is 93 years old and living in New Jersey. He told me his side of the story. And it was not what I expected. He was not the villain I thought he was. He was just a red young man who made a bad choice. He has been living with that choice for 50 years. And I think he is ready to make amends. Lucy looked at me with a complicated expression. I could see her trying to process everything I had just told her. The trust fund. My mother's first marriage. The visit to my uncle. It was a lot to absorb, especially after a big dinner and a few glasses of wine. Mom, she said slowly, I did not know any of this. You never told us. I did not know myself until recently, I said. That is the thing about secrets. They stay buried until someone digs them up. And I am done leaving things buried. I want this family to be honest with each other. I want us to talk about the hard things. Because if we do not, we end up like my mother and her brother. Two people who loved each other, but could not find a way back to each other. Matthew reached across the table and took my hand. His eyes were red. Mom, I am sorry. I did not know Grandma Grace went through all of that. I should have asked more questions. I should have paid more attention. I squeezed his hand back. You were a child. It was not your responsibility. The past is the past. All we can do is move forward with the truth. We sat in silence for a while. The coffee was growing cold in our cups. Emerda excused herself to use the bathroom, giving us a moment of privacy. When she came back, the mood had shifted. There was a lightness in the air. The kind of lightness that comes after a heavy weight has been lifted. Lucy read her throat. Mom, I want to apologize for the way I have treated you sometimes. I know I can be pushy. I know I can be demanding. I never meant to make you feel like you were not good enough. You are the best mother-in-law anyone could ask for. And I am sorry if I ever made you feel otherwise. I looked at her. For once, her eyes were sincere. There was no performance, no calculation. Just a genuine effort to say something that had needed to be said for a long time. Thank you, Lucy, I said. That means a lot to me. And I am not trying to hold anything against you. We are all running. We are all doing the best we can. That is all anyone can ask. Emerda came back to the table and sat down. She looked around at all of us and smiled. Well, this feels like a new beginning, she said. I am honored to be here for it. We finished our coffee and moved to the living room. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Matthew told a funny story about a client who had tried to claim insurance on a stolen boat that had never existed. Lucy talked about her plans for the new appartement, the color scheme she was considering, the furniture she wanted to buy. I listened and smiled and felt a wah RMTH spreading through my chest. It was not the wah RMTH of triumph or revenge. It was the wah RMTH of connection. The wah RMTH of a family that was finally rooting to find its way. Later, after Matthew and Lucy had left and Emerda had gone home, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet again. I held the brooch in my hand and looked at the little daisy. I thought about my mother. I thought about Frances Whitmore. I thought about the trust fund and the fortune and all the things that had once seemed so important. But what mattered most in that moment was something simpler. The feeling of having read the truth. The feeling of having let go of the weight I had been carrying. I placed the brooch back on the nightstand and climbed into bed. The sheets were cool and soft. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander. I thought about the future. The house needed a new coat of paint. The garden could use some new roses. And there was still so much to learn about my mother's life, about the family I had never known, about the world that had been hidden from me for so long. But I was not afraid anymore. I was curious. I was eager. I was ready for whatever came next, because I had something I had never really had before. I had the truth. And the truth was going to set me free.